My daughter-in-law ordered me to chew on the banana peel, while my son averted his eyes in fear. I smiled painfully in that moment. Neither of them knew that the key to the luxury house they lived in and the expensive steak they were chewing was actually with me. The next morning, I turned that key and locked the door in their faces. Justice must be served, and this arrogance must be punished. You won't believe what I did next. Before we get to the full story, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. I am Marilyn, a 67-year-old widow. I was trying to live in my small house in a quiet corner of Los Angeles on my $1,650 retirement pension, without needing anyone. My only son, Daniel, only I know the hardships I went through to raise him. He became a successful businessman, yes, but he lost his heart to Carla, a spoiled and disrespectful woman who worshipped luxury and money. For Carla, I was the poor mother-in-law who didn't belong in their shiny world. She always looked down on me for getting by on my $1,650 pension and my modest life. In her eyes, I was an old piece of furniture, not even worth talking to. And my son, Daniel, he had chosen to live in his wife's shadow. He turned a blind eye to Carla's disrespect towards me, even knowing he received support from me for her luxurious tastes. That's why it had become normal for my daughter-in-law to disrespect me. That evening, Carla's mother was also invited to dinner. Expensive wines were opened at the table. Carla and her mother were laughing joyfully as they ate the steaming, expensive steaks in front of them. In front of me, a simple salad plate was placed, as if it were a favor. As I quietly tossed my salad, I felt Carla's mocking gaze on me. She raised her expensive wine glass towards me. "So, Marilyn," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "The steaks look amazing, don't they? Oh, sorry, you can't taste them, right?" I could see the arrogant glint in her eyes. They shared a brief look with her mother and giggled. Then she said that sentence. The sentence that froze my blood and broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "You better chew on that banana peel on the table, Marilyn. It suits you more." There was an icy silence at the table. My eyes immediately searched for my son, Daniel. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the meat on his plate. He was so afraid of his wife that he couldn't say a single word against this terrible insult to his mother. He couldn't even lift his head. I understood in that moment. I was alone. At that table, in that moment, I vowed to remain silent. I didn't shed a single tear. I just smiled. Because as they ate that expensive steak, they had no idea they were actually eating the vacation money I gave them. They had taken that money from me, the one they called poor. The pride and anger inside me had already initiated a silent plan for revenge. They had made their biggest mistake by underestimating a quiet grandmother. And the next day, they would learn what that key was. The next morning, I woke up early as the first light of dawn broke through my bedroom window. My hands were no longer trembling like they had been the night before. There was a strange calmness within me now, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a cup of strong black coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, looking at the documents spread before me. These weren't just any papers. These were the deeds, the investment certificates, the bank statements that told the real story of who Marilyn Davidson actually was. You see, Carla had made one fatal assumption about me. She thought poverty was defined by how you lived, not by what you owned. She saw my modest house, my simple clothes, my quiet lifestyle, and she drew her conclusions. But what she didn't know, what my son had conveniently forgotten to tell his precious wife, was that I had been a senior investment banker for 35 years before I retired. I hadn't just saved money. I had multiplied it, invested it wisely, and built a portfolio that would make most millionaires jealous. That $1,650 pension she mocked? That was just my Social Security check. I didn't need it. I donated most of it to the local food bank every month. The real money, the substantial fortune I had accumulated, sat quietly in accounts and properties that bore my name alone. And here's where the story gets interesting. 5 years ago, when Daniel and Carla wanted to buy their dream house, that stunning 4-bedroom colonial in the hills with the infinity pool and the panoramic city views, they came to me. Not to Carla's mother with her designer handbags and her country club membership. To me. Because banks weren't lending to Daniel at the time due to some credit issues from his earlier business ventures. I had written the check, $650,000. But I hadn't gifted it to them. I had structured it as a private family loan with very specific terms, all documented by my attorney, all legally binding. The house was in my name as collateral until the loan was fully repaid. They had been making small payments, yes, but they were still $400,000 in debt to me. Carla didn't know this. Daniel had told her the house was theirs, free and clear, probably too embarrassed to admit he'd needed his supposedly poor mother's help. As I sipped my coffee, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, Richard, who had been handling my affairs for 20 years. I told him what had happened at dinner, and I told him what I wanted to do. There was a long pause on the line, and then Richard said something I'll never forget. He said, "Marilyn, I've been waiting for you to stand up to them for 3 years now. Let's do this properly and legally. They won't know what hit them." The second call was to my accountant, Susan, who managed my investment portfolio. I asked her to prepare a complete financial statement showing my actual net worth. I wanted documentation, clear and undeniable, of exactly who had the money in this family. The third call was to a real estate agent I knew, Margaret Chen, one of the top agents in Los Angeles. I asked her to come to my house that afternoon with comparable sales data for Daniel and Carla's neighborhood. Margaret asked why, and I simply said, "I'm considering selling a property, and I need to know its current market value." By 10 o'clock that morning, I was dressed in my best suit, the navy blue Armani I had bought years ago but rarely wore. I put on the pearl necklace my late husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not a poor old woman, but a businesswoman who had once commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions. That woman was still here. She had just been quiet for too long. I drove to Daniel and Carla's house, my hands steady on the wheel. It was 11 in the morning, and I knew they would both be home. Daniel worked from his home office on Wednesdays, and Carla never went anywhere before noon, preferring to sleep in after her late-night wine sessions. I parked my modest Toyota in their circular driveway, right next to Carla's bright red Mercedes convertible, the one she had bought with the credit card I didn't know was secretly linked to a line of credit I had co-signed for Daniel 2 years ago. Another detail my son had forgotten to mention to his wife. I rang the doorbell and waited. Carla answered, still in her silk pajamas, her face showing surprise and then immediate annoyance at seeing me. She didn't invite me in. She just stood there, blocking the doorway, looking at me as if I were a vacuum cleaner salesperson who had interrupted her morning. "Marilyn," she said, not even bothering to hide the irritation in her voice. "What are you doing here? We weren't expecting you." I smiled at her, the same smile I had given her the night before. "Good morning, Carla. I need to speak with you and Daniel. It's important. May I come in?" She sighed dramatically, as if I were asking her to donate a kidney, and stepped aside. I walked into the foyer of the house, my house really, and looked around at the expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier, the original artwork on the walls, all purchased with money they didn't actually have, funded by credit and by my continued financial support. Daniel came down the stairs, looking nervous when he saw me. He knew, somewhere deep down, that his cowardice at dinner had consequences. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain. "Is everything okay?" I set my purse down on their marble console table and turned to face both of them. "No, Daniel. Everything is not okay. We need to have a conversation that is long overdue, and we're going to have it right now. Please, both of you, sit down." Carla crossed her arms, her face defiant. "I don't have time for this, Marilyn. I have a spa appointment at 1. I looked at her directly, and something in my expression made her defiance waver just slightly. Cancel it, Carla. Trust me. You're going to want to hear what I have to say. They led me into the living room, that beautiful space with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Carla perched on the edge of the white leather sofa, radiating impatience. Daniel sat next to her, his hands fidgeting. I remained standing. I wanted the advantage of height for what came next. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. The one Richard had prepared for me years ago when we first structured the house loan. I placed it on the glass coffee table in front of them. Do you know what this is? I asked calmly. Carla glanced at it dismissively. Some papers? Marilyn, what is this about? I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, the loan agreement with both mine and Daniel's signatures on it. This, Carla, is the loan agreement for this house, the house you're sitting in right now, the house you think belongs to you. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Daniel's face had gone pale. He knew exactly what I was talking about, and the panic was starting to show. I continued, my voice steady and professional, the voice I had used in countless business meetings. 5 years ago, your husband came to me because he needed $650,000 to purchase this property. The banks wouldn't lend to him due to his credit history, so I provided the funding. Not as a gift, Carla, but as a documented loan. This house is collateralized in my name until the loan is fully repaid. Carla looked at Daniel, confusion and anger mixing on her face. Daniel, what is she talking about? You told me this house was paid off, that it was ours free and clear. Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. His voice came out as barely a whisper. I didn't want to worry you about the details, honey. I was making the payments. I was handling it. I pulled out the second document, the payment history. You've paid back $250,000 over 5 years. You still owe me $400,000. According to the terms of this agreement, which my attorney drafted and which Daniel signed, I have the right to call in this loan at any time with 30 days' notice. The silence in that room was deafening. Carla was staring at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language, her mind clearly racing to process this information. Daniel looked like he might be sick. I wasn't finished. I pulled out another set of papers, the financial statements Susan had prepared. Let me tell you who I really am, Carla, since you seem to have such strong opinions about my poverty. My name is Marilyn Elizabeth Davidson. I worked as a senior investment banker at Morrison Securities for 35 years. I managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When I retired, I had accumulated, through careful saving and strategic investing, a personal net worth of approximately $3.2 million. I watched Carla's jaw literally drop open. Her perfectly painted lips formed a small O of shock. I continued, laying out each page on the table. I own this house as collateral. I own 3 rental properties in downtown Los Angeles that generate $45,000 a year in passive income. I have a diversified stock portfolio currently valued at $1.8 million. I have retirement accounts, bonds, and a trust fund that I established for my future grandchildren, should I ever have any that I feel worthy of receiving it. Carla found her voice, though it came out strangled. That's impossible. You live in that tiny house. You drive that old car. You dress like someone who shops at thrift stores. I smiled at her, and this time there was no pain in it, only power. I live modestly because I choose to, Carla, because I learned long ago that real wealth isn't about showing off. It's about security, about freedom, about having choices. I don't need to drive a Mercedes or wear designer labels to prove my worth. Unlike some people, my self-esteem isn't tied to material possessions or to putting others down. Her face flushed red, anger replacing shock. You've been lying to us this whole time, pretending to be poor so you could, what, test us? I shook my head. I never lied to anyone. I never told you I was poor. You assumed it, Carla. You saw what you wanted to see because it made you feel superior. And my son, my own flesh and blood, allowed you to disrespect me because he was too weak to stand up for his mother. Daniel finally spoke, his voice desperate. Mom, please. I'm sorry about last night. Carla didn't mean it. She was just joking around. She'd had some wine. I turned to look at my son, and he flinched at the coldness in my eyes. Didn't mean it? Daniel. She told me to chew on a banana peel like I was some kind of animal while she ate expensive steak and laughed with her mother. And you sat there, silent, more afraid of your wife than concerned about your mother's dignity. That wasn't a joke. That was cruelty, and you enabled it. Carla stood up, her whole body rigid with rage. How dare you come into my house and speak to us like this? I raised an eyebrow. Your house? Carla, did you not hear anything I just said? This is my house. My name is on the deed, and as of this moment, I am officially calling in the loan. You have 30 days to pay me the $400,000 you owe, or I will foreclose and take possession of this property. The color drained from Carla's face. You can't do that. Daniel, tell her she can't do that. Daniel was shaking his head, his voice broken. Mom, please. We don't have $400,000. You know we don't. The business has been struggling. We've been living on credit. I've been trying to keep everything afloat without worrying you or Carla. I picked up my purse and the folder, leaving the copies of the documents on their table. Then I suggest you figure something out very quickly. Sell some of Carla's jewelry. Sell that ridiculous car she doesn't need. Liquidate your retirement accounts. I frankly don't care how you do it, but you will pay me what you owe, or you will lose this house. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on their hardwood floors. Carla's voice came out as a screech behind me. This is insane. You're a vindictive old woman. Daniel, are you going to let your crazy mother destroy our lives? I turned back one last time, and when I spoke, my voice was ice. I am not vindictive, Carla. I am simply done being disrespected in silence. I am done watching my son become a shadow of the man I raised him to be. And I am done pretending that your cruelty is something I should tolerate because we're family. You want to know what's crazy? What's crazy is that I gave you everything. Funded your lifestyle, made your dreams possible, and you repaid me by treating me like garbage. Well, the Bank of Marilyn is officially closed. I walked out of that house with my head held high, leaving behind two people who looked like they had just survived an earthquake. As I drove away, I could see Carla through the window, screaming at Daniel, her arms waving wildly. I felt no guilt, only a profound sense of liberation, as if I had finally removed a heavy weight I had been carrying for years. Over the next week, things escalated in ways even I hadn't fully anticipated. Daniel called me repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry to desperately pleading. I didn't answer. I had said everything I needed to say. Carla, true to her entitled nature, tried a different approach. She showed up at my house 3 days later, without Daniel, carrying an expensive bottle of wine and wearing what I assumed she thought was a humble expression. I watched her through my window as she rang the doorbell repeatedly. I didn't answer. She left the wine on my doorstep with a note that said, "I'm sorry for any misunderstanding. Can we talk?" I left the bottle there for 2 days until the mailman asked if I wanted him to move it. I told him to take it home to his wife. There was no misunderstanding. There was only Carla finally realizing that her actions had consequences. My attorney, Richard, called me with updates. He had sent the formal notice of loan default to Daniel's business address, as required by the agreement. The 30-day clock was ticking. Richard also informed me that Daniel had called his office 4 times, trying to negotiate an extension, trying to work out a payment plan, trying anything to avoid the foreclosure. Richard had politely told him that any negotiations would need to go through me, and that I had been very clear about my terms. Full payment within 30 days, or I would take possession of the property. On day 12, something interesting happened. Carla's mother called me. I almost didn't answer when I saw the unfamiliar number, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mrs. Davidson?" came the smooth voice of Patricia, Carla's mother, the same woman who had sat at that dinner table and giggled while her daughter humiliated me. "I think we need to have a conversation woman to woman." I considered hanging up, but decided this might be entertaining. "I'm listening, Patricia." There was a pause, and I could hear the calculation in her silence. "I understand there's been some tension between you and Carla. These things happen in families. But surely we can resolve this without destroying my daughter's marriage and her home. What will it take for you to drop this loan business?" I almost laughed. "Drop the loan business? You mean, what will it take for me to forgive a $400,000 debt because your daughter's feelings are hurt?" Patricia's voice became harder. "Don't be naive, Marilyn. You know how these things work. You're doing this for revenge because Carla made one little joke at dinner. It's petty, and it's beneath you." The condescension in her voice, the same condescension I had heard from Carla, ignited something fierce in me. "One little joke? Patricia, your daughter told me to chew on a banana peel while you both ate steak and laughed at my expense. She has spent years treating me as if I'm beneath her, as if my life and my contributions mean nothing. And you sat there enabling it, teaching her by your example that this behavior is acceptable? So no, this isn't about one joke. This is about years of accumulated disrespect. And it's about teaching both of you that I am not a doormat." Patricia's voice turned sharp. "If you foreclose on that house, you'll lose your son forever. He'll never forgive you. Is that what you want? To be a lonely old woman with no family?" I felt a pang at those words, but I didn't let it show in my voice. If my son chooses his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity, then perhaps that tells me everything I need to know about the man he's become. I didn't raise him to be a coward, Patricia, but somewhere along the way, he learned to be one. Maybe losing the house will teach him to find his spine again. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline, from the rush of finally speaking my truth to these people who had taken me for granted. That evening, I received an email from Daniel. It was long and rambling, full of apologies and explanations and promises. He said Carla was sorry, truly sorry, and that she wanted to make things right. He said they had been to a financial advisor and were exploring all options to pay me back. He said he loved me and couldn't bear the thought of losing his relationship with me over money. I read it 3 times, and then I wrote back, just one line. "This was never about money, Daniel. This was always about respect." On day 18, something shifted. Daniel showed up at my door alone, without Carla, looking exhausted and defeated. I let him in this time because he was still my son, and despite everything, I wanted to hear what he had to say without his wife's influence. We sat in my small living room, the same living room he had grown up in, surrounded by photos of his childhood and the modest furniture I had kept for decades. Daniel sat across from me, his head in his hands, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy I had raised, scared and confused and desperate for guidance. When he finally looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I've been such a fool. I've been so blind. I don't know when I became this person, when I became someone who would let his wife treat you the way Carla has. I'm ashamed, Mom. I'm so deeply ashamed." I sat quietly, waiting. I needed to hear all of it. He continued, the words pouring out as if a dam had broken. "When I married Carla, I thought I was getting everything I wanted. She was beautiful and confident and ambitious. She came from this world of country clubs and society events that seemed so glamorous. I wanted to be part of that world. I wanted to prove that I could give her the life she was used to. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I let her opinions become my opinions. I let her values replace the values you taught me. And I stood by while she disrespected the most important person in my life. He wiped his eyes, and I felt my own heart begin to soften despite my anger. The truth is, I've been afraid, Mom. Afraid that if I stood up to Carla, she would leave me. Afraid that I wasn't good enough for her. That without all the luxury and the spending and the keeping up appearances, she wouldn't want me anymore. And that fear made me weak. It made me betray you. The one person who has always been there for me. Who sacrificed everything to raise me. Who gave me every opportunity I ever had. I spoke for the first time, my voice gentle but firm. Why didn't you tell Carla the truth about the house? About my financial help? About who I really am? Why did you let her believe I was poor? Daniel shook his head miserably. Because I was embarrassed. I built this image of myself as a successful self-made man, and I didn't want her to know that my mother had to bail me out, that I couldn't make it on my own. And then, when she started looking down on you, I told myself it was easier to just let her believe what she wanted than to have the difficult conversation. I thought I was protecting my marriage, but all I was doing was protecting my ego at your expense. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, I spoke, and my voice was heavy with the weight of years of disappointment. Daniel, I didn't need you to tell Carla how much money I have. I needed you to defend me when she was cruel. I needed you to stand up and say, "Don't speak to my mother that way," regardless of whether you thought I was wealthy or struggling. A person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, and the fact that you only feel guilty now that you know about my money tells me you still don't understand the real lesson here. He looked stricken. That's not true, Mom. I felt guilty that night at dinner. I couldn't sleep. I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know how to fix it. I leaned forward. You fix it by being brave, Daniel. You fix it by choosing character over comfort. You fix it by deciding that some things, like your mother's dignity, are worth fighting for, even if it makes your life more difficult. Daniel nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. I know. I know that now. And I want to do better, Mom. I want to be the man you raised me to be. But I need your help. Carla and I, we've been living beyond our means for years. The business is struggling. We're drowning in debt. I don't have $400,000. I don't even have $40,000 liquid. If you foreclose on the house, we'll lose everything, and I don't know if our marriage will survive it. I studied my son's face, seeing the genuine anguish there, and I felt the eternal conflict of a mother who loves her child, even when that child disappoints her. Tell me about your marriage, Daniel. The truth. He sighed deeply. It's not good, Mom. It hasn't been good for a while. Everything is about appearances with Carla. About what car we drive, what restaurants we go to, what our friends think. We never just talk anymore. We never connect. And since you called in the loan, since she found out about the money, she's been furious. Not at herself for how she treated you, but at me for not telling her, for not managing our finances better, for not being the provider she thought she married. She's threatened to leave me 3 times this week. I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing this. Part of me wanted to say good riddance to a daughter-in-law who had brought such toxicity into our family. But another part of me, the part that remembered the idealistic young man Daniel had been when he first introduced me to Carla, felt sadness for the deterioration of his marriage. What do you want, Daniel? I asked. If I gave you a magic wand right now, what would you wish for? He thought for a moment, really thought, and when he answered, his voice was different, more mature somehow. I want to rebuild my life on truth instead of pretense. I want to learn to value what actually matters instead of chasing status. I want a relationship with you where I'm not ashamed or afraid to show you who I really am. And I want to find out if there's anything real left between Carla and me once all the material stuff is stripped away. I nodded slowly. Those are good answers, But here's what I need you to understand, son. I can't fix your life for you anymore. I've been enabling you just as much as you've been enabling Carla. Every time I wrote a check, every time I co-signed a loan, every time I helped you out of a financial jam, I was teaching you that there would always be a safety net, that you didn't have to face the consequences of your choices. That stops now. His face fell. So you're going to foreclose? You're really going to take the house? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Daniel had learned to ride a bike, where he had played with neighborhood children, where I had raised him to be honest and kind and strong. I'm going to give you a choice, Daniel. Not an easy one, but a fair one. You have two options. Option 1. You find a way to pay me the $400,000 within the next 30 days. Sell everything you can sell. Borrow from Carla's parents if they're willing. Cash out your retirement accounts and pay the penalties. Liquidate every asset you have. If you can come up with the money, the house is yours free and clear, and you can continue living whatever life you choose without my involvement. I turned back to face him. Option 2. You accept that you cannot pay the debt. I take possession of the house as per our agreement, but instead of selling it to a stranger, I offer to rent it back to you at fair market rate, which will be approximately $3,000 a month. You'll have to dramatically downsize your lifestyle, cut your spending, and learn to live within your actual means. Carla will have to get a job instead of spending her days at spas and boutiques. You'll have to make real changes, Daniel. Uncomfortable, humbling changes. But you'll have a roof over your head, and you'll have the opportunity to rebuild your life on a foundation of reality instead of debt and pretense. Daniel stared at me, processing these options, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. And if I choose option 2, if we rent from you, what happens to our relationship? Will you forgive us? Will things go back to normal? I shook my head slowly. Things will never go back to what they were, Daniel, because what they were wasn't healthy. But if you choose option 2, and if you show me through your actions, not just your words, that you're serious about changing, about becoming a man of character again, then yes, we can rebuild our relationship. It will take time. It will require Carla to genuinely change her attitude and behavior toward me, not just pretend because she needs something from me. But I'm willing to try if you are. He sat there for a long time, his head bowed, and when he finally looked up, there was something different in his eyes. Not the desperate panic I had seen before, but a kind of resigned determination. I don't think I can come up with $400,000, Mom. I've looked at every option, and the math just doesn't work. So, I guess I'm choosing option 2. But I need to talk to Carla first. She needs to agree to this, and honestly, I don't know if she will. The idea of downsizing, of living in a rental, of her having to get a regular job, it's going to be really hard for her to accept. I walked over and sat down next to my son, taking his hand in mine. Daniel, let me tell you something I've learned in my 67 years. The people who truly love you will stand by you when things get hard. They'll sacrifice and adapt and find joy in simple things, because being with you matters more than the trappings. But people who only love the lifestyle you provide, who only value you for what you can give them materially, those people will leave when the money runs out. Maybe it's time you find out which kind of person Carla really is. He squeezed my hand, and for a moment, we sat together in the peaceful quiet of my small living room, and I felt closer to my son than I had in years. After Daniel left, I called Richard to inform him of the options I had presented. He was surprised that I was offering the rental arrangement, having expected me to simply foreclose and sell. Marilyn, he said carefully, are you sure about this? You have every legal right to sell that property and walk away with your money. You don't owe them anything after how they've treated you. I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. Richard, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this because despite everything, Daniel is still my son, and I want to give him one last chance to become the man I know he can be. If he fails, if they refuse the terms or don't follow through, then I'll sell without hesitation. But I need to know I tried. 3 days later, Daniel called and asked if he and Carla could come to my house together. His voice was nervous, but there was also a note of something else, something that sounded almost like hope. When they arrived that evening, the change in Carla was immediately visible. She wasn't wearing her usual designer outfit. Instead, she had on simple jeans and a plain sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face, free of its usual heavy makeup, looked younger and more vulnerable. She wouldn't meet my eyes as they came in. We sat in my living room again, the three of us, and the atmosphere was tense with unspoken words. Finally, Carla spoke, and her voice was small and shaky. "Mrs. Davidson, Marilyn, I owe you an enormous apology. I've been thinking about nothing else for the past 3 weeks, and I'm horrified by my own behavior. The way I treated you at that dinner, and frankly, the way I've treated you for years, was inexcusable. I was cruel and dismissive and arrogant, and I'm deeply, deeply sorry." I watched her carefully, trying to gauge the sincerity. She continued, and now tears were starting to fall down her cheeks. "I grew up in a family where money and status were everything. My mother raised me to believe that your worth as a person was measured by your possessions and your social standing. I internalized that so deeply that I became exactly the kind of person I now realize I never wanted to be. Someone shallow and mean and empty. When Daniel told me the truth about the house, about your actual financial situation, about everything you've done for us, I was shocked. But more than that, I was forced to confront what an awful person I've become." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and I noticed she wasn't wearing any of her expensive rings. "I called my mother after Daniel, and I had a long conversation about accepting your rental offer. I told her we were going to downsize, that I was going to get a job, that we were going to live more modestly. Do you know what she said? She said I was throwing my life away, that I should divorce Daniel and find someone who could provide the lifestyle I deserved. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't want to be anything like her. I didn't want to spend my life chasing things that don't actually matter and treating people as disposable based on their bank accounts." Carla looked directly at me for the first time, and I could see genuine remorse in her red-rimmed eyes. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've burned bridges that might be impossible to rebuild. But I'm asking you, humbly, to give me a chance to show you that I can change. Daniel and I have accepted your offer to rent the house. I've already applied to 3 different marketing positions, and I had my first interview yesterday. We're selling my Mercedes, most of my jewelry, and all the furniture and decorations we don't actually need. We're going to learn to live within our means, and more importantly, I'm going to learn what it means to be a decent human being." I sat quietly for a moment, letting her words sink in. This was not the Carla I had known for the past 5 years. This was someone who had been shaken to her core and was, perhaps for the first time in her life, being forced to examine her own character. "Carla," I said finally, my voice measured, "I appreciate this apology. I do, but I need you to understand that words are easy, change is hard. If I agree to this rental arrangement, if I give you both this opportunity, I need to see consistent, sustained change in your behavior and your values. Not for a week or a month, but for as long as we're in each other's lives." She nodded vigorously. "I understand. I absolutely understand, and I'll prove it to you. I'll prove that I can be better." Daniel spoke up then, his voice steady. "Mom, we've made a plan, a real budget, a real financial plan. We've cut our expenses by 60%. We're going to pay you the $3,000 a month in rent on time, every time. We're going to pay off our credit card debt. We're going to rebuild our lives the right way. And most importantly, we're going to earn back your trust and your respect." I looked at these 2 people, these flawed and broken, but perhaps finally awakening people, and I made my decision. All right, we'll try this. I'll have Richard draw up a rental lease agreement. It will be a standard 1-year lease with clear terms and conditions. You'll pay first and last month's rent up front, plus a security deposit. The rent is due on the first of each month, and if you're late more than twice, the lease terminates and you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Is that clear? They both nodded, relief washing over their faces. Thank you, Mom, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for not giving up on me. I held up my hand. I'm not doing this just to be kind, Daniel. I'm doing this because I believe in consequences, and I believe in second chances, in that order. You're experiencing the consequences of your choices right now. The loss of financial security, the humiliation of having to downsize, the strain on your marriage, all of that is the natural result of living beyond your means and prioritizing the wrong things. But I'm also a mother who believes people can change if they're truly willing to do the hard work. So this is your second chance. Don't waste it. Over the next several weeks, I watched from a distance as Daniel and Carla began the difficult process of rebuilding their lives. The moving sale they held to liquidate their excess possessions was apparently quite the event in their neighborhood. Carla's Mercedes sold within days. Her jewelry collection, minus a few sentimental pieces, went to a consignment shop and brought in nearly $30,000, which they used to pay down their highest interest credit cards. They sold the original artwork, the designer furniture, the expensive kitchen gadgets they had never used. They kept the basics and little else. Carla got a job as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm, making a modest salary but with room for growth. She was used to sleeping until 10 and spending her afternoon shopping, so the transition to waking at 6:30 and working a full day was jarring. Daniel told me she came home exhausted that first week, almost in tears from the adjustment, but she kept going. She didn't quit. Daniel, meanwhile, finally got serious about his business. Without the pressure of maintaining an unsustainable lifestyle, he was able to make more practical decisions. He downsized his office, let go of some unnecessary staff, and focused on profitability rather than appearances. Within 2 months, his business started showing signs of real improvement. On the first of each month, like clockwork, I received a check for $3,000. Sometimes it was delivered in person, sometimes by mail, but it was always on time. After the 3rd month, Daniel started adding little notes with the checks. "Thank you for this opportunity," one said. "We're learning so much," said another. I saved every note. One Saturday afternoon, about 4 months into the rental arrangement, Carla called me. "Marilyn," she said, and I could hear nervousness in her voice. "I was wondering if you might want to come over for lunch tomorrow. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and salad. I'd really like to spend some time with you, if you're willing." I was surprised by the invitation, but I was also curious to see how they were really doing. "All right, Carla. What time?" The next day, I drove to the house that was technically mine, but that they were now renting. When Carla opened the door, I was struck by how different she looked. She had gained a little weight, which actually suited her, filling out her face and making her look healthier. She was dressed casually in jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair natural and unstyled. "Come in," she said warmly, and there was genuine happiness in her smile. The house looked completely different. Gone were the expensive decorations and the ostentatious displays of wealth. The rooms were simply furnished with practical, comfortable pieces. There were books on the shelves now, not just for show, but clearly being read, with bookmarks sticking out. There were plants in the windows, inexpensive grocery store finds that Carla was clearly tending. In the kitchen, where we had once had that terrible dinner, the table was set with simple dishes and a homemade meal. Nothing expensive, nothing fancy, just good food prepared with care. As we ate lunch together, Carla and Daniel told me about their new life. Carla talked about her job, how challenging it was, but also how satisfying it felt to earn her own paycheck, to contribute, to learn new skills. She told me about her coworkers, some of whom had become real friends, the kind who invited you over for potluck dinners instead of charity galas. Daniel talked about his business, how much clearer his thinking was now that he wasn't constantly stressed about maintaining appearances. He had lost some clients who only wanted to work with firms that looked impressive, but he had gained others who valued his actual skills and results. "The funny thing is," Carla said, setting down her sandwich, "I'm happier now than I was before. I thought I needed all those things to be happy. The car, the clothes, the lifestyle, but all of that was just stress and emptiness dressed up to look glamorous. Now, when I come home at the end of the day and Daniel and I cook dinner together and just talk about our days, I feel more content than I ever did at those expensive restaurants." I felt something warm spreading in my chest as I listened to them. This was real. This wasn't a performance for my benefit. They had genuinely changed, or at least, they were in the process of genuinely changing. After lunch, Carla asked if we could talk privately. Daniel excused himself to his home office, and Carla and I moved to the living room. She sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap, and took a deep breath. "Marilyn, there's something I need to tell you, and I need to apologize for again. After you called in the loan, after everything came out, I said some terrible things about you to my mother and my friends. I was angry and embarrassed, and I blamed you for ruining my life. I told people you were vindictive and cruel. I painted myself as the victim of a heartless mother-in-law." She looked down at her hands. "I need you to know that I was wrong. So wrong. You weren't being cruel. You were being just. You were holding us accountable for our actions and our debts. You were teaching us lessons we desperately needed to learn. And I'm sorry that I tried to make you the villain in this story when I was the one who behaved villainously." I reached over and placed my hand on hers. "Carla, I appreciate you telling me this. That takes courage." She looked up, tears in her eyes again. "I called my mother last week and told her the truth, the whole truth about how I treated you, about the banana peel comment, about everything. I told her that you were right to do what you did, and that I was ashamed of the person I had been." "Do you know what she did?" "She hung up on me. She said I was betraying my own family by taking your side. I haven't heard from her since." I felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to say that Patricia deserved to be confronted with the truth, but another part of me felt sad for Carla, losing her mother's approval, even if that approval had been toxic. "I'm sorry, Carla. I know that must be painful." She shook her head. "It is painful, but it's also freeing. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to her standards, trying to be the daughter she wanted me to be. And in doing that, I became someone I'm not proud of. Maybe this distance from her is what I need to figure out who I actually want to be." We talked for another hour about her childhood, about the pressures she had felt, about her marriage to Daniel, and how it had changed over the years. She was opening up to me in a way she never had before, treating me not as an inferior to be tolerated, but as a person worthy of real conversation. When I left that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time regarding Carla and Daniel. I felt hope. Over the next few months, this new dynamic continued and even strengthened. Carla got promoted at her job, a testament to her actual skills and work ethic rather than her connections. Daniel's business secured a major contract that would provide steady income for the next 2 years. They continued to live modestly, continued to pay their rent on time, continued to show me through their actions that they had truly learned and grown. One evening, about 8 months into the rental arrangement, I invited them to dinner at my house. I cooked my famous pot roast, the one I used to make for Daniel when he was growing up. As we sat around my small kitchen table, eating simple food and talking about our lives, I was struck by how much this felt like a real family dinner. No pretense, no competition, just people who cared about each other sharing a meal. After dinner, as we cleared the dishes, Daniel said, "Mom, Carla and I have been talking, and we have something we want to ask you." I looked at them both, curious. Carla spoke, her voice gentle. We know we still owe you $400,000 from the original loan. We're not in a position to pay that back in full anytime soon, but we want to start making payments toward the principal above and beyond the rent. We've worked it out in our budget, and we can afford to pay you an extra $1,000 a month. It will take years, but we want to pay you back every penny we owe you. Not because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Are you sure you can afford that? I don't want you to put yourselves in a difficult position. Daniel shook his head. We can afford it, Mom. We've learned to live on much less than we thought we needed. And more importantly, we want to do this. We want to take responsibility for our debt. We want to show you that we're serious about being people of integrity. I looked at these two people who had transformed so much over the past months, and I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and love. All right, if you're sure, then yes, I'll accept your payments toward the loan. Richard can modify the agreement. As the months turned into a full year, I watched my son and daughter-in-law continue to grow and change. They weren't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still old habits that occasionally resurfaced. But the overall trajectory was unmistakably positive. One year to the day after they had started renting from me, Daniel and Carla invited me over for a special dinner. When I arrived, I found the table set beautifully, not with expensive china, but with care and thought. There were candles, fresh flowers from their garden, and homemade food that smelled wonderful. As we sat down to eat, Carla raised her water glass. Marilyn, we want to propose a toast. 1 year ago, you did something that felt devastating at the time, but turned out to be the greatest gift anyone has ever given us. You held up a mirror and forced us to see who we had become. You gave us consequences and compassion in equal measure. You showed us that real strength isn't about dominating others or buying respect with money. It's about standing up for your dignity and your values even when it's hard. Daniel continued, his voice emotional. You taught me what it means to be a person of character. You showed me that the easy path is rarely the right path, and that real love means holding people accountable rather than enabling their worst behaviors. I'm a better man because of what you did, Mom. I'm a better husband, a better son, and hopefully someday, I'll be a better father because of the lessons you taught me this year. I felt tears streaming down my face as they spoke. Carla stood up and came around the table to hug me. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for being strong enough to do the hard thing. And thank you for teaching me that a person's worth has nothing to do with their bank account and everything to do with their character. We spent that evening talking about the future. They told me they were thinking about starting a family, but they wanted to make sure they were in a stable position first. They wanted to be the kind of parents who taught their children real values, who showed them by example what mattered in life. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey we had all been on. A year ago, I had been a dismissed and disrespected mother-in-law, sitting at a table while someone told me to chew on a banana peel. I had been hurt and angry and determined to teach a lesson. And I had done that, but in the process, something unexpected had happened. I had gotten my family back, not the pretend family of polite dinners and forced pleasantries, but a real family built on honesty and respect and genuine affection. 2 years after I had called in the loan, Daniel and Carla had paid back nearly $70,000 beyond their rent. They had consistently made their payments, never once being late, always including those little notes of gratitude. Their marriage had not only survived the financial crisis, but had actually thrived. They had learned to face challenges together, to communicate honestly, to find joy in simple things. Carla had been promoted twice more and was now managing a team of her own. She told me with pride how she treated the people who worked for her with respect and fairness, how she never let anyone feel inferior based on their position or their circumstances. She had become a mentor to younger women in her office, teaching them about work-life balance and self-worth. Daniel's business had stabilized and grown. He had a reputation now not for flashiness, but for reliability and quality work. His clients trusted him, and he had built relationships based on mutual respect rather than on impressing people with expensive lunches and gifts he couldn't afford. One afternoon, about 2.5 years after this journey had begun, I received a call from Richard, my attorney. "Marilyn," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "I just received a wire transfer from Daniel and Carla. They've paid off the entire remaining balance of the loan, the full $330,000 remaining." I was shocked. "How is that possible? Where did they get that kind of money?" Richard chuckled. "Apparently, Daniel's business received a major windfall. They secured a contract with a Fortune 500 company that came with a substantial signing bonus. Instead of using that money to buy back the luxuries they had given up, they chose to pay off their debt to you in full. The house is now legally theirs, free and clear." I sat down, overwhelmed by this news. They had done it. They had actually paid back every penny they owed me. That evening, Daniel and Carla came to my house together. They had brought a bottle of sparkling cider and an envelope. "Mom," Daniel said, handing me the envelope. "This is the deed to the house. It's officially ours now, but we want you to know that none of this would have been possible without you. You invested in us, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. You believed we could be better than we were, even when we didn't believe it ourselves." Carla added, "We want to ask you something. Would you consider moving in with us? Not because you need to. We know you're perfectly independent, but because we want you there. We have that guest suite on the first floor that's sitting empty, and we'd love to convert it into a space for you. Your own private area where you can come and go as you please, but where you'd be close to us, where we could share meals and time together." I looked at them in surprise. "You want me to live with you?" Daniel nodded earnestly. "We do, Mom. We really do. Not out of obligation, but because we've learned over these past years that having you in our lives, really in our lives, makes everything better. We've talked about starting a family, and honestly, we can't imagine raising children without having you nearby to guide us and to be part of their lives. Please think about it." I felt overwhelmed by the offer, by the sincerity in their eyes, by how far we had all come from that terrible dinner where I had been told to chew on a banana peel. "I'll think about it," I promised. "It's a big decision, but I'm honored that you asked." Over the next few weeks, I did think about it carefully. I visited the house and saw the guest suite they wanted to convert for me. It was spacious and bright, with its own bathroom and a small kitchenette. It would give me independence, while also allowing me to be close to my family. I thought about my modest house, the one where I had raised Daniel, where I had lived alone since my husband passed away. It held memories, both beautiful and painful. But maybe it was time for new memories, new chapters. 1 month later, I said yes. The moving process was surprisingly emotional. As I packed up my little house, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had come so close to losing my son forever. 1 more year of silence, of accepting disrespect, of enabling bad behavior, and the damage might have been irreversible. But I had found the courage to stand up for myself, to demand better, to hold people accountable. And in doing so, I had saved not just my dignity, but my family. When I moved into the guest suite, Carla had decorated it beautifully with things she knew I loved. There were photos of Daniel as a child. There were my favorite books arranged on shelves. There were plants and comfortable furniture and touches that showed real thought and care. "Welcome home, Marilyn," Carla said as she showed me around, and the warmth in her voice was genuine and deep. That first evening in my new home, we had dinner together in the kitchen where, years before, I had sat in humiliation. But everything was different now. The table was set with care, and we shared a simple meal of pasta and salad that Carla and I had prepared together. As we ate, Daniel raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to the strongest woman I know." "Mom," Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall, and then helping me learn how to stand back up. 3 months after I moved in, Carla came to my suite one evening with news. She was pregnant. We cried together, tears of joy and gratitude and hope for the future. I want to be the kind of mother you are, she told me. I want to raise this child with the values you've taught me, with kindness and strength and integrity. Will you help me? I held her hands and promised that I would. 9 months later, I was in the hospital room when my granddaughter, Emily Grace, was born. As I held that tiny, perfect baby in my arms, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. If I had remained silent, if I had continued to accept mistreatment, if I had chosen peace over principle, none of this would have happened. Sometimes love means being soft and gentle, but sometimes love means being strong and demanding better. Emily is 3 years old now, and she calls me Mimi. She runs into my suite every morning to wake me up with kisses and to drag me to breakfast with her parents. She's being raised in a home where people treat each other with respect, where material possessions are appreciated but not worshipped, where character matters more than appearances. Carla is an incredible mother, patient and loving and wise. Daniel is a devoted father who makes time for his daughter no matter how busy his work gets. They're raising Emily with the values I tried to instill in Daniel, the values that got lost for a while, but that ultimately found their way back. Last week, we had a family dinner, and I looked around the table at my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter, and I felt overwhelming gratitude. Carla caught my eye and smiled, and without words, I knew she was remembering too. Remembering where we started and marveling at where we had ended up. As we cleared the dishes after dinner, Emily playing nearby, Carla said quietly, "Marilyn, I hope you know that turning that key, calling in that loan, forcing us to face ourselves, it was the most loving thing anyone has ever done for us. You saved us. You saved our marriage, our future, our souls, really, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful." I hugged her close. This woman who had once told me to chew on a banana peel, who had transformed into someone I was proud to call my daughter. "We saved each other," I told her. "You gave me the courage to stand up for myself. I gave you the opportunity to become who you were meant to be. We're even." That night, as I sat in my comfortable chair in my suite, reading a bedtime story to Emily, who had snuggled into my lap, I reflected on the path that had led us here. The pain, the confrontation, the difficult months of change, all of it had been necessary. All of it had been worth it. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I handled things, if I wish I had been less harsh, if I feel guilty for the hardship I caused. My answer is always the same. I don't regret standing up for my dignity. I don't regret demanding respect. I don't regret teaching my son and daughter-in-law that actions have consequences and that real love sometimes means tough love. Because here's what I learned through this whole experience. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. For years, I had tolerated disrespect because I was afraid of conflict, afraid of losing my son, afraid of being alone. But in tolerating that treatment, I had taught Carla that it was acceptable, and I had taught Daniel that he could abandon his principles without consequence. The moment I stopped tolerating it, the moment I stood up and said, "No more," everything changed. It wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. And now, as I watch my granddaughter grow up in a home filled with love and respect and integrity, I know that turning that key was the right choice. Justice was served. The arrogance was punished. And through it all, something beautiful emerged. A real family, built on a foundation of truth and respect, rather than on the shaky ground of pretense and enabling. So to anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, being disrespected or taken for granted or treated as less than they deserve, I want to say this: you deserve better. You deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of your bank account or your social status or your age. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to stop enabling bad behavior and to demand better from the people in your life. It might be painful in the short term, but in the long term, it's the only path to real, authentic, loving relationships. As for me, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Living with my family, respected and loved, watching my son be the man I raised him to be, seeing my daughter-in-law embrace values that truly matter, and helping to raise a granddaughter who will grow up knowing that true wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. That banana peel moment changed everything, and I will always be grateful that I had the courage to turn that key.